When you're trying to decide if you want to deploy the server core or Windows Server with the desktop experience, there are many things you need to consider. To look at the advantages, the server core has a small footprint. It's going to use fewer resources and it consumes less disk space. It is just above 6 gigabytes on disk. The desktop experience, I'm going to say DE, is just above 10 gigabytes. So you're comparing, a difference basically of 4 gigabytes between the two operating systems, the Server Core Edition and the Desktop Experience Edition. Also, an advantage, Server Core installs fewer components because it's just a smaller operating system, much smaller footprint. You will get fewer updates. Now, you're still going to get updates like any other operating system, but just not as many because there's not as many components that need to be updated. So this will reduce things like monthly restarts. And since it is a smaller operating system, the attack surface is smaller, so it makes it less vulnerable to many of the common exploits. So it really has a more secure posture by default. Now, some disadvantages. Some applications are not supported on Server Core. Now, supported or not supported, that's an interesting term. Like, what does that actually mean? It means it is not supported by the vendor. It does not mean it will not work. So if you install an application, let's say you have a test environment, you deploy Server Core in your test environment and you install some application you've purchased from a vendor and it runs perfectly in your test environment. That does not mean you should deploy it to your production environment. You would actually have to reach out to the vendor or go through their website and see if they specifically support that app on Server Core. If they do not support it on Server Core, even though it may run fine, if you have a problem and you put in a support request with them, they are not obligated to help you if they tell you they don't support their app on a Server Core. So this is not just working, vendor support is the main thing we're looking for here. Now, most applications will run on Server Core now because this Server Core concept has been around since Windows Server 2008. So we're at 12, 13 years, not a new addition. Now, some roles and services are not available, only a handful, but the rule of thumb, if a role or a feature that you want to load on this server cannot be managed through command line or PowerShell, Server Core can't load it because Server Core does not run a graphical interface. So any tool that requires GUI components, you just can't load it on Server Core. And there are only a handful of those. And as we said, there is no local graphical user interface. So what we will do, and we'll see this in our demonstrations, we will manage much of this remotely. Well, I'll just use GUI tools on other machines. So don't think you have to be a subject matter expert in PowerShell or these CMD commands to manage a Server Core. You really don't. You can just do it from another machine. When you install Server Core, it's just like installing any other edition. You choose your installation source. Just what are you booting from? Like it's a DVD, a USB drive, a network type deployment, language, time, currency, keyboard. Then you select the operating system to install. When we do that, this is what we get. So we have our 2019 Standard Edition. That's actually Core. Then we have 2019 Standard Desktop Experience. So that's going to be the GUI. Then we have Data Center. That's Core. And we have the Data Center Desktop Experience with the GUI. Once we've done that, we will simply accept the license agreement. We will choose Upgrade, which would be an in-place upgrade, or you're going to choose Custom if you want a clean install. In this course, we're always going to do a custom to have a clean install. Then you'll just choose the disk that you want to install on. After a reboot, it's going to ask you for the password for the local administrator account, and your install is done. If you've ever installed Windows Vista, Windows 7, 8, 8.1, Windows 10, they all have the same installation as the server operating system. The only exception is, you'll choose your server OS here, but this is other than choosing the operating system, it is exactly the same as installing Windows 10. It's just much faster and does not ask nearly as many questions on the back end. So a very straightforward install. Depending on the speed of your computer, this takes approximately 15 minutes to install the operating system. If you have a faster computer, it actually takes maybe 10 minutes even. One of the things that turns some people off about Server Core is the initial administration. If I install an operating system, some things I have to do. You have to name the computer. You have to configure the IP settings. If you want to join a domain, you're going to do that. And you may want to do things like configure Windows updates, enable, disable remote management, a lot of things that you may want to do. Well, if you try to do that from a command line or through PowerShell, that's a lot of work. Renaming a computer, defining the IP configuration, and trying to join it to a domain. That would be a turnoff in itself for many administrators. So what Microsoft has done, they have came up with this sconfig, stands for server configuration. This is a menu-driven system. With this, you don't have any need for scripting. So it eliminates the need for scripting. All you'll do is walk through this menu-driven system. If I want to rename the computer, you just type number 2, and it's going to ask you for the new name of the computer. If you want to define your network settings, you just type number 8. It's going to walk you through the process of defining your IP address and all the other settings like your subnet mask, default gateway, DNS servers. If you wanted to activate. So that is the common tool we'll use for the initial configuration. Makes it a very straightforward process.